Assalamu alaikum, Sister Zuleyha. Thank you for accepting my invitation.
Alaikum salam. You're welcome. Good to be here.
Okay, first, would you please introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is, as you mentioned, Zuleyha Keskin. I currently work at Sturt University. I'm the course director at the Center of Islamic Studies and Civilization. I also lecture in Islamic spirituality. I've done my PhD on looking at inner peace, but I actually did my master's thesis looking at interfaith dialogue from an Islamic perspective. So I've had an interest in this topic quite a
Okay,
bit.
thank you.
So
Thank you
in a
so much.
nutshell, that would be me. Yeah.
Okay, great. Could you please give brief definition of interfaith dialogue? What does interfaith dialogue mean to you?
Okay. To me, interfaith dialogue means, although you could say dialogue is really about conversing, and I guess that is probably the most important part of interfaith dialogue, where you have parties from different perspectives, whether it's faith perspectives, values perspectives, coming together and chatting, conversing, interacting, so that all parties involved learn from each other, benefit from the experience, and hopefully grow from the experience as well. So there has to be a level of interaction, I guess, for interfaith dialogue to happen, and it has to be both ways,
Great.
not a monologue, but
Mhm.
dialogue. Yeah.
Okay. Who is the target audience for interfaith dialogue, especially in your country, Australia?
I mean, I think that everyone can be the target with interfaith dialogue. It's something that everyone can benefit. I'll touch on this a bit later, but then the reality is, though, in Australian context, the number of people who belong to a faith, as in an institutional faith, is about 70%. So 30% of people actually do not belong to an institutional faith. But having said that, I think everyone has a particular faith. Even no faith is a faith. And therefore, I would say that interfaith dialogue is open to everyone, but depending on a person's background, depending on their, I guess, stance and belief system, the type of dialogue we would have would vary. But it's for all.
Yeah, great. What are the challenges of interfaith dialogue when you are trying to do it in Australia? What kind of challenges you encounter with?
There's probably a number of levels. One of them is, I guess, there is a lot of, I would say, extremism at all fronts. When I say extremism, I mean people who just, do not want any type of diversity, whether they're, if they're Muslims or Christians or Jews or non-faith, they just do not want diversity. So when people have that sort of extreme view, it's not easy to engage them. So it takes a lot of effort, a lot of creativity sometimes to be able to bring them to the same platform or even the same room as people of diversity. So I think the resistance is the biggest. And two is also, I feel like it's resources. In Australia, we're talking about a population of 22 million. In the US, it's even more. But much more.
Sure,
I believe it's about 270 million, if I'm not wrong. But it's something that you need to do at the grassroots level. And trying to engage everyone is not an easy task in itself, I guess. But you've got to start somewhere. I don't want to sound negative.
Do you think it's a necessity to have interfaith dialogue? Especially in Western countries where there are many faith traditions.
Absolutely. We're living in a global world, so either people are interacting with people of other faiths in their everyday activities, or they're exposed to it through the media. So they need to understand people of other faiths for them to be able to, I think, function in this global world. So it is a necessity. If they don't meet the real Muslims or the real Jews or real Buddhists, they're going to meet the ones on the media, and the ones on the media are not necessarily any better. Actually, they're usually not very good. So interfaith dialogue becomes imperative for a real experience of people of other faiths.
Should we have any concern about losing our faith, or our religion or our cultural identity when we are having dialogue with other faith traditions.
Absolutely not. I think one thing in my experience has shown me it actually makes a person a bit better in their faith. So as a Muslim, I found that it's actually made me a better Muslim. So what event ends up happening, and this is if we're truly open to dialogue, is we observe people of other faiths, we identify the good qualities that they have, and they become a mirror to what's in our faith. Because what's in our faiths are very common. So if we're talking about Christianity, you know, there's the love. They have that love for God, for example. Always talk that, you know, a lot of my Christian friends always talk about that love for God. And in Islam there is that as well. Allah is the al-wadud, the loving. So you can easily bring it back to your own faith and allow it to connect you with that aspect of your faith. So you know, if anything, from my experience, it's made me a better Muslim. And I also, can I give you a
Sure, please.
Expand? Like, I think the thing is, it does take a while for people to be open to these sort of observations. But in one of our trips a few years ago, went to Istanbul and Rome trip. It was a dialogue trip, and you know, you observe. You know, one thing I observed with our Christian friends was that they were very, you know, whenever we went on the bus or anything, you know, let's reflect on what we experienced. The bishop would say that, let's reflect on our experience. And in Islam, again, there's the notion of tafakkur, which is reflection. So again, it's common, but it's not something that probably normally a Muslim group of people would do when they go on a trip. You know, they'll get on the bus and then probably start chatting and what have you. But the Christians also said how they admired how Muslims prayed 5 times a day, the dedication to prayer. So again, that's a very good example of how each faith tradition observes and connects it to something that they have in their own faith tradition.
Great, thank you. Should we be judgmental to others' faiths if we see some kind of practices kind of absurd to us? Being critical about them or discussing about them, or just ignore them?
I think we have to always be respectful. Otherwise, the barriers will go up. Like if the minute it's human nature. The minute we try to, you know, say, well, I don't really get that. And I've seen that sometimes, you know, say some Muslims might do it with regards to the notion of Trinity. You know, they can be quite critical of it. But rather than being critical, trying to understand, it doesn't mean you have to agree with it, but trying to understand where they're coming from, trying to understand, I guess, why they may have developed that concept. You know, I think that's what we need to do. We need to stop judging and try to understand, particularly knowing that, you know, these values or these beliefs are very sacred to that person. And I guess this is where empathy is important. If someone has said to me as a Muslim, you know, this is what I think about your Prophet, it would be very hurtful for me. So how, you know, then why would I say anything hurtful to someone else? So beyond those saying something, I do believe it's important to try to understand where they're coming from, why they have the particular stance or the particular belief that they do.
Yeah. As Muslims, we need to have references from Quran and Sunnah from the life of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What do you think? Can we find some practice of Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam about interfaith dialogue? Some references from Quran, some verses, some hadiths from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Do you have some? Can you elaborate on that?
There are a number, but I particularly like chapter 49, verse 13, which talks about, you know, humanity being created in nations and tribes, so that we may get to know one another. If you want the exact wording, have a look. But the whole idea is we are created as a diverse nations or groups or organizations or countries and so forth. But we're not created to have conflict with each other, but to learn from one another. To me, this is what dialogue is about, because it's about learning from our differences, and I guess conversing about those differences as well. And with our Prophet, Sallallahu, I think the Najran delegation that came to Medina is particularly important because, we're talking about a Christian group that have come, and they had dialogue between them and the Prophet, and they remained Christian. They were Christian, and what's even key is our Prophet ﷺ allowed them to pray in his mosque. Again, this is an extraordinary gesture. Like when you think about it in today's time, how many mosques or how many imams of mosques would allow Christians to pray in their church? But our Prophet ﷺ did that 1400 years ago. So there are many examples like this, and another example where our Prophet ﷺ stands up for a Jewish funeral ceremony, again showing respect for humanity. And the classical verse about how killing one person unjustly is like killing the whole of humanity. So Islam gives incredible value to human beings, and there's a whole philosophical argument because of that, because human is seen as a very extremely valuable creation, and therefore we need to respect and value human beings, no matter what faith they are.
Yeah, great, thank you. Would you propose some programs, events, and activities to facilitate interfaith dialogue? Maybe you can talk about your experience in your daily life there in Australia. What kind of programs and activities you advise, especially to the practitioners who are maybe the beginners in interfaith dialogue? Would you suggest some activities?
Yeah. There's so many things. I think the moment we put our minds to it, we can come up with very creative ways of doing it. Here, Ramadan seems to be a very popular time to be involved in dialogue. And it's a way of getting, many people involved, because there are some who don't feel comfortable conversing, but they love cooking. So sharing a meal, the contact, I guess, the communication that happens over breaking bread is very good. And also there's a cultural element to it, which a lot of people love. So I would say that iftars are a very good way. And you can take that beyond Ramadan, where, we can have, we have barbecues here, which is quite Barbie, as we call it, Barbies for short. We like to shorten everything here in Australia. So we even kind of shorten Australia, and we call it Australia. So even barbecues are a great opportunity. Weekend gatherings, so coming together over food. But I think another way of bringing together people is based on a cause rather than directly related to maybe faith, as in the climate, the environment. This is a big issue for all of us.
Common universal problems we have. So
exactly,
we should get together around the table and we can discuss all these universal problems, common humanity problems around the table all together, right?
That's right. Yeah, it could be about drugs. All countries have drug problems these days. Poverty. As you said, common universal problems which we all care about. And those types of initiatives, particularly, I think, appeal to the youth, because the young people do want the world to be a better place, and so these sort of initiatives, they're passionate about. So it could be very good. Whereas what I find here is, if you try to call young people and say, "Hey, let's talk about everyone talk about their faith. Let's come together," there could be some reluctance because they don't feel confident enough. But if you say, "Let's come together and let's talk about how we can
protect our environment."
Protect our environment and what we can do for poverty or
avoid pollution,
child abuse, whatever. Yeah, there's so many global issues that they run at the idea, because they do want to make a difference in the world. So that could be another way of bringing people together, those sort of common causes.
And especially Turks are very generous about hosting people in their homes for dinners,
Absolutely.
for lunch. And as you said, maybe
They love it.
the ways to heart going through the stomach.
Very
So
true. The way to a person's heart is through their stomach. Absolutely. The number of iftars I've been to, and with Turkish families, they put their heart on the table almost. They
yeah.
just put everything, and people they sense that, they feel it, they love it, and amazing conversations happen around the table.
Hmm.
So yeah, it just brings together, I guess, so many, the whole family, the kids get involved that way. They're helping their parents.
Hmm.
With the cooking, it becomes an exciting moment. And the host, they're trying to understand how to, I guess, interact with the family. What sort of presence would be good for the family? So it creates a whole lot of conversations, which is fantastic.
Yeah, the women here in United States are organizing cooking classes for ladies, for women.
Oh, okay.
But actually, they organize them for women, but sometimes most of the attendees are men. So, so it's
Okay.
a great opportunity
Excellent.
also, yeah, to get together.
I, yes, I love events that break down those gender stereotypes. So that sounds fantastic.
Okay, I am done with my questions.
Okay.
If you would like to add anything else, please, more than welcome. Otherwise, you can quit.
Yeah. No, I think. Yeah, I think a lot of the experiences that US is doing is very similar to what we're doing,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, it's beautiful best practices. And I do think with interfaith dialogue, grassroots is essential.
Mm-hmm.
Although leadership is important, what leaders say do influence us. So if our imams or our priests and that encourage these sort of practices, the masses do get affected by it. But most of the work has to happen at the grassroots level. So it's great that you've taken this initiative as well by interviewing me, and I hope it helps.
Yeah, of course, the young generation especially will benefit from these comments and interviews, inshallah, in the best way possible. Thank you so much for your time, for these great
Okay.
comments, inspiring and very informative, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you. It's 8:16. Thank you. Have a
Thank you.
good day or evening.
Bye bye.
All right.